Hello, everybody, and welcome to my recording about wordless books. I would like to explain why in reception we choose wordless picture books before we move on to texts. Now, often parents feel a bit concerned because they really do want their child to start reading and using the phonemes and decoding words. And I understand that feeling. But the reason that we use wordless picture books is that we really develop the skills of comprehension. Now, this is incredibly important because if a child just looks at words in a book and flicks through a book, they cannot answer questions about a book unless it was written, and perhaps they would then remember it. But we do find as children read and just read very short sentences, they often don't even remember what the sentence was when you ask them to tell you back. If they look very, very in depth at the story and actually at each page and talk about each page in detail, that way they really understand what's happening in the book. They understand how the story is progressing, how different events occur. They will also pick up, and especially if you point it out, what sort of problems there are in the book and then how they get solved. And that's so important for when they start to develop their own stories. Research has also shown, which is very important, that parents and more able readers that sit with children that do look at books that do not have words do talk in more detail about each page because it lends itself to talking in detail about each page of the story. So this is a very simple view of reading, and we can see there's two sides to reading. The first is decoding, and by that we mean using the phonemes to work out the sounds in a word and then reading the word. So for example, it might be a word like cat, and they would say k, at, cat. And there would be some tricky words in there like the, which they just have to remember. So this is an important skill, but it will come later in reception, after they know far more sounds, after they're very confidently looking at sounds and being able to read them and blend them to read the word, and after we introduced a few tricky words. Very important in reception is language comprehension, and as we know, our children are EAL children, so it's really important to them that they pick up lots of vocabulary, and also they really understand the questions you ask about the story. So this is our focus. So when you're reading with your child, make sure that the language you use is very rich. So when you look at a page, you can describe the house, you can describe, say, the bear outside the house, you can talk about where it might be going. You can talk for a while on one page, and this will help your child so much to also speak like this when they read a story with you. Reading is so much more than decoding. It really is understanding and making meaning of the text. And this is what we want them to have. Already early on in reception, with a bit of practice, they've had a few books now, they're already using more depth of language when they're talking about a story than they had prior to having these wordless books. So, the benefits. The first, the child has to have attention on the page. You will find when you get word books that they will just run their finger along and read it quickly and flip to the next page. But as there's no words on that page, they're really forced to look very closely at everything that's going on in the picture. And they're paying close attention to detail so they can tell what's happening in the story because there's no text to tell them. And you really must mark that with them so they know that they have to look closely to know what's happening in each stage of the story. If you are reading your book first, and I really suggest you do, and you can do this again and again, that maybe you read first, they read next, they are building up their vocabulary. This is fantastic if you do it in native language first. So they actually get all those words in their native language and it's much easier for them to understand. And then they can bridge across to English after a few reads in their native language. It will be far easier for them. And then if they can jump between the two languages, it helps them become bilingual, to know it in both languages. So we're looking to improve your child's language development when you're reading the story. The child will learn new words and they will understand what a sentence is. Now, this is challenging for the children at this age. You will find if you ask them a question about a book or you ask them to tell you what's on a page, they will generally just try to say one word. So you must model it. For example, Goldilocks is looking in the house. She's opened the door. She goes inside the house and she sits down at the table. Sentences like that, very simple to start with. Then you might make it more detailed as you read later and later. So, for example, after you've done a few readings in the simple language, you might say, she sits down at the big oak table and she looks at the hot, steaming porridge. You can use language like this, and this can be in your native language. The adult reading can also prompt the child, and it will also give them that language they need. And it will also help explain what's happening in the illustration, because sometimes it might not be clear to the child. So you can help them with that. Okay? So the next, we also promote creativity. So you've got to use your imagination when you're reading these stories, don't you? Sometimes a picture can give you a few different stories or a few different ideas. And this is fantastic. When they change it each time they read it, this is great because they're really using their imagination. They're becoming a storyteller. And they also can create characters and voices and noises, which is really fun. So after you've had a few reads, make sure you put in some language there that the characters are talking to each other. It also strengthens their understanding of elements of the plot. So looking closely at every picture, they can tell how a story is developing. They're starting to understand there's a beginning, a middle, and an end. There's a problem and a solution. And this will really help them when we move into the children creating their own stories, because they'll know how stories usually pan out with a beginning, a problem, a resolution, characters being introduced, a setting being introduced. And you may ask, how do I do this though? I don't understand. You've given me some ideas, but how do I actually do it? Well, I will have a second video where I walk through a book. But to help you, there's always, or mostly in the books we have, questions at the back. So look through these first before you even open the book with your child. There's usually a retelling map. So this really helps to use if you've looked through the book 4 or 5 times and the child says, I know it. Open up the back and see if they can use the story language and actually tell you the story again. This is such a great skill if they can do that. If they still think they can do it, close the book altogether and see if they can retell. We're really looking for the children to understand characters and settings and to tell main events in a story. And if they can retell a story really clearly and understand what happens, this is fantastic for their understanding of stories and their development themselves, creating stories. So here's a couple of tips, and there will be more in my walkthrough. Look at the front cover together and you say, what do you see? And just see if they can name some things. So I would point out, look, what is this place? What is the setting? Now you might need to explain setting, you might need to give examples. So I might say, is it a supermarket? Is it a school? And they will say, no, it's the home. What are the what are the characters here? You want them to say bears, and let's look closely at the bears. What are they doing in the picture? And then I would say, where's the title? Now they will start to know what title is. They just need a point. And we know the title is the name of the book, and it should give us some clues. So we read the title together and then we say, what do you think it's about then? Can you make some predictions? What's going to happen? Look at the cover and look at the title. What's going to happen? As your child progresses, you might even go to the back and look at the blurb, which gives you a bit more information about the story. Here it says there's a big surprise. What could the surprise be? And then take a picture work. You can just ask them, you can do it or they can do it. Look through the pictures and see what grabs their attention. And you might even at this stage give them a little bit of vocabulary to help them for when you're looking through the book again. Name anything they're not sure about what it might be. And then you read the story. So I would suggest you go first and invite your child to add to the story, or as you finish a page, they can finish that page too. They can repeat the page you've just done, telling you what they remember. You can tell them to add interesting voices. You can play the parts of the characters together. Encourage your child to take a turn, though, of telling their own version of the story. And again, as I've said before, it does not need to be the whole book. You can do 2 pages per night. You can say, okay, today we're going to do the beginning, tomorrow we do the middle, and the day after we do the end. Now, if you find it's too much for your children because you're doing quite in depth, do a few pages. And ask questions about the book, such as what's your favourite picture? Do you have a favourite part of the story? And what is that and why? And what about your favorite character? Why do you like them so much? And then other questions like, can you think about a time you felt like this? Or have you been in a forest? It's really good to relate the text back to them. As always, remember, first, please speak in your native language or the language that your child is strongest in, so they really can develop that first and then move to English afterwards. I would suggest a few readings in native language before moving to English. Thank you.